I'm sorry about our sort of all hands area is a little bit cramped, but even more you feel intimate and can sit close to your neighbor and exchange ideas on the breaks. So yes, I'm gonna cover the evolution of testing, a little bit about Veriff in the beginning as well. My journey has been through several companies as a head of quality engineering, and now at Veriff my title is VP of Engineering, but currently I'm coordinating client testing, for example. So that's a little bit, with the startup vibe, you do this and that, but you do what is necessary today, and tomorrow you're going to be doing something different. So that's sort of a fact of life in startup scene anyway. So what is Veriff? How many of you had the possibility to use Veriff as end user, possibly? A couple of people, right? So basically we turn physical documents into digital identity per session. So let's say you have a bank and they want to get you as a customer, and they need to verify whether you are you and get your document data to their databases. So they go through the flow, you select the document, you do the selfie, you show the document front and back sides, and in a couple of minutes bank gets your information with a verdict whether you were actually you. And that's quite important, because these days trust is everything in internet. So you can be a dog still in internet, or even worse. So Veriff is here to really prevent our identity theft, and that has been tried many times. We are able to catch those guys who are trying to impersonate somebody else. We also deliver this hard requirement that some financial institutions have, what goes to know your customer policies. So they need to do certain verifications repeatedly on their customers, and make sure the customers are really who they claim to be. Also, if you are online marketplace or cryptocurrency exchange, you do some marketing campaigns, and many people try to abuse your marketing offering, for example. So Veriff also helps there to make sure that each person goes through their flow once and not twice or 10 times or 100 times. So that cuts a lot of costs and risks for any kind of online provider, basically. And all that results with a higher level of trust between people who are remote and are interacting not physically but virtually, digitally. So Veriff is really here to enable the sort of be as you would be face-to-face with your company, but you can be actually anywhere. So that's the Veriff product. We also have lots of competitors these days coming up, but we feel always that we are one step ahead of them what goes to automation and accuracy and conversion metrics. So doing very well. All right, a little bit about myself so you know who you're talking to. I worked at Skype as head of quality engineering for 8 years, and then did a couple of side gigs, but ended up in Piedrive as a second quality person with a quality title, so head of quality engineering at Piedrive, and then continued to Veriff. I also have a pet project, Põhjala, so that's the thank you. It's not so pet anymore. It has grown to be actually pretty big, number 4 in Estonia, what goes to liters of beer or revenues. But we also got nominated as top 100 breweries of the world out of 30,000. So our position was 57th on 2018, and soon we're going to get 2019 numbers, so we'll see. I also do a little flying, have a little over 1,000 jumps. So during summertime, on weekends, you can find me at Rapla Airfield, where I fly this wonderful Pilatus Porter. Occasionally, you also do some jumps, but not that active anymore. All right. So, of course, I have to advertise our podcast, which got launched on in November last year. So there, me and Priit Liivak and Sergei Anikin are talking about software engineering. It's in Estonian, so those who need to practice their Estonian skills can chime in and listen to that. But we specifically wanted to do it in Estonian, and we have had wonderful guests, and also the listener base is about well over 1,000 people regularly, which is great. Thank you for that. Alrighty, so evolution of testing. I first sort of encountered testing in 2005 when I joined Skype. They said that, I don't know anything about testing, but they said you will learn. So I had to learn, and I did a little bit of hardware testing as a Skype certification program, but then quickly after 1 year turned into being responsible for whole testing at Skype. And it was a great ride. We did lots of good stuff back when Skype was still a cool thing. Not anymore though, yeah. Microsoft ate it. All right, but I did a little bit of research about testing, and now is my opportunity to get you in the mood as well. So if you look at the history, and if you specifically focus on computers and information, like computer age, let's say so, then really in the beginning it was sort of, we couldn't differentiate testing from debugging basically. So it was early days, computers was as size as a room, and then it sort of started to develop slowly, but somewhere at the late early 70s, etc., it sort of turned into people actually started to write requirements, so they wanted to validate whether this application is actually meeting those requirements. So testing was sort of a demonstration that yes, this application actually meets its requirements. And then there was a short period, according to this guy who researched that in depth, Keplerin and Hetzel, so where there was a movement that we should destroy the software, we should basically kill it because it's not working properly. That negativity, of course, didn't fly so well. So, and I think they did a little bit of disservice for testing in general, because that negativity is sort of carried on into the future decades as well. But it turned into the sort of evaluation of whether software is actually is able to work as intended, and people are using it. So personal computers got involved, more people started to use software, and actually then it entered into the prevention mode where it is today, where we actually want through testing to validate that anything that users are seeing is actually something that we wanted them to see. So now fast forward to recent history. On the below the line you see the sort of a methodology development. Above the line you see the approach to testing, if you will. So in the 80s everyone used boxed software. You had floppy disks to upload it into a computer. So everything that needed to go out, you can't really call back, It's out there on the floppy disk, so it worked or didn't, and there was no way to upgrade it almost. It was really a big problem then. And in 90s, that's where I got involved with computers in 95. Already people started to evaluate different approaches to software development, so they realized that this waterfall methodology, over-the-wall drawing stuff didn't really work. But also they started to evaluate automation opportunities. So they realized that all this manual testing is not getting us where we want to be. And in 2000s, basically Agile took over, and people realized that we can actually release software more than just once. And automation also developing new frameworks that helped automation to move forward. And yeah, last 20 years has been a really interesting ride in terms of testing. So from development, everything sort of merged together. You know, the developer became responsible of so many more things that they did in the early days. So DevOps and CI/CD virtualization was a real thing, and automation also developed further to enable scale and cover more frameworks, more languages. So that was interesting, right? Definitely. When I joined Piedrive, coming from Skype, I basically had to relearn everything that I knew about testing in context of CI/CD and DevOps mentality, etc. So, but what is the future? And nobody can tell. But yes.
Why did you have to relearn everything?
Because
doing it wrong?
I'm actually gonna cover that a little bit later. We did lots of things that normal companies wouldn't do. Because you understand the impact was immense, you know, we had tens of millions of users online, you did something wrong, boom, everything went up, you know, so you had to invest into testing a lot, and we did that. But in future, I think the machine learning is coming into play, in some way or form, probably, so many human processes are automated through machine learning already. Machines are able to learn, they're able to generate data, and they're actually better at it than humans. So we're going to see probably lots of sort of autonomous test bots, etc., replacing humans here and there. We're going to see a lot more testing done in production in form of canary releases. And the first sort of steps when you release something, first tests will be done in production, and if everything goes well, you basically continue with the deployment to other servers. They call it sort of a collaborative smart testing. You can Google for these two guys. They have a pretty good idea of what's going on there. So, yeah, really interesting times from that perspective. Okay, this is my own sort of a take on testing. When I'm looking back, I see that there is a sort of a testing as such has been like really a quality control function, which evolved into quality assurance function, which basically means that you set up the processes in a way that everything that is built using these processes will become high quality. But then it went to the sort of quality engineering, where the testing moved closer to production and more automation was introduced. And hopefully it will evolve into engineering quality then, although I think it's not going to be the name that they call it in the future. So we'll see. Interesting times again. Yeah, another perspective presented by this Petty cohort in 2003. He basically looked at testing schools of thought and tried to sort of qualify different types of approaches into sort of schools of thought. So analytical school is something that you do in academic scenes. Everything is very technical, very sort of accurate. The humans are basically not involved almost. So you probably use the analytic school when you test medical equipment or satellites, for example. So, and then the standard school is there to measure the progress, like how well we are progressing in software development. It actually invests into cost monitoring as well, and making sure that all the repeatable processes always are carried out in the same way. And then quality school is more like process oriented. It's like policing developers, and quality function is acting like a gatekeeper. We've seen that a lot, so there is a little bit of overlap between standard school and quality school. And then last 10 years, I think the Agile school has been there, you know, Agile software testing, etc. People talking about it, which is more like focusing on the user testing, and the Agile school is basically trying to use testing as measurement of completeness. So whether a story is completed or hasn't been tested, it's been not testing the whole framework, but one story only or one task only. And of course, in Agile school, there is a heavy focus on automation because that cuts time, which means that we can get everything done during the sprint. And last but not least is the context-driven school that is trying to use the psychology, and I focus their efforts where it makes sense, so that they really want to test things that are most important for the user, and very sort of focusing on the user and stakeholder sort of context there. So and try to also a little bit emphasize the size of those schools of thought. So I think many companies are in the quality standard school these days. All the startups are in the Agile school. Some are evolving into more sort of context-driven school as well. So yeah, I forgot explaining the axis, but you got it already, I guess. So the y-axis shows the depth of testing, and then x-axis shows the productivity and throughput, how fast you can put things through using these approaches in terms of testing. And then I also added a couple of companies here that I have personal relationships with. So Skype was really a big part of sort of a standard and standard and quality school, while Piedrive was purely Agile, and Veriff is somewhere moving towards Agile. So we test a little bit here and there, but we really measure or we use testing to validate the completeness of the task and then fix it later when it doesn't work. All right, so we probably are moving towards the context-driven school, because in our business, mistake is a really expensive one, specifically what goes to dealing with personalized information. So we have no way of losing any personal records that people are putting through our system. Okay, yeah, so also I wanted to give you a little bit of background what was done in Skype, Piedrive, and now in Veriff. So you all already know that back in the day Skype was a downloadable application. It was downloaded by millions, and actually it was good because the whole thing ran on people's computers. We had very little servers. We used peer-to-peer protocol to basically build up the Skype cloud. And what was good about Skype was, I mean, why it was successful in its own time was that it actually just worked. I mean, the UI on the computer screen and all the networking, it just worked. It freely passed all the firewalls, no issues there. And that wasn't so for other VoIP solutions back in early 2000s. What was good about Skype was that the growth was so fast, and the revenues also sort of matched up very quickly. So the scale enabled us to invest a lot into testing. We had basically 2 teams testing same release candidate parallel in Tallinn and Ukraine over like 24 hours. And we also utilized a little bit of the follow the sun principle, where one team finished, the other team in US picked up the process and continued, because we already back then were quite a global organization. So I invested millions of euros annually into testing in terms of salaries and investments into outsourcing as well. So it's a luxury, because usually companies are not in that place. But every mistake, every delay or additional second that people spent, I don't know, if you wanted your call to be connected, you know, how quickly it was done, it was multiplied by 30 million immediately every call. So the waste or the impact was really big. So that's why we actually invested a lot into testing. So a couple of interesting things that we did. Already like 2006, 2007, 2008, one of the things was log analyzer. Skype was basically an application in various platforms, but it utilized the same core library, and that core library logged a lot of data about session, about its own health, etc. So we basically consolidated all this logging information into our servers and had some nice parsing algorithms running on it. So we knew how much each library version consumed memory, CPU, how it behaves in different networking conditions, etc. So all that data was centrally gathered. So you just had to enable your Skype client to work in debugging mode, and then this data started to flow to us. The other cool thing was the automatic call system. So it was a full room of small computers calling to each other. So when we released a new release candidate, we put it into automatic call system, and it generated about 10,000 calls an hour. So 10,000 executions automatically, where we were able to monitor how it behaves, and then we were also tweaking the networking conditions and see how it behaves. So there's lots of sort of this black box testing that was automated, but since it was automated, it didn't cost so much for us. So all the user and experience testing was outsourced to outsourcing companies providing these services. But well, if you still remember using Skype, it actually worked pretty well because we built Skype using Skype. So we were our own dog fooders, so we had to eat our dog food every day. And most of the Skype folks in offices, they run the latest versions, of course. So every moment we realized that something's wrong, bug got logged, and I think the average bug count was, well, we started with 3,000 and we had continuous bug count around 1,000. So it didn't shrink below that anymore. So, well, but it still worked for most of the people, right? Yeah, so some folks came into Skype, wanted to use some other tools that very quickly realized that it's not an option. You have to use Skype, and email even got well, later people started to use email as well, but everything is happening in Skype chats. Also, a very interesting thing in Skype was that 2009, when we did the Agile transformation, so Skype was sort of a chaotic big startup throughout its like 2003 until 2009. But then we really took ownership of services. Teams got formed, teams that are like have standardized interfaces between them, and also the testing was going through this Agile transformation. And actually, it's remarkable that many things that we did back then, when Microsoft purchased Skype in 2011, it was actually something that they took over from Skype. So that is sort of a cool thing. Then later, they of course killed the testing function altogether. So all testers were renamed to something else. But then I was already gone from that organization. So. All right, so a little bit about Piedrive. Like I said in the beginning, I was the second guy with the quality title. So I joined, we had one UI automation engineer, and that was it. So we had a sort of a situation where we didn't have actually testers to test, because, I mean, of course, the product owners tested and developers tested, but there was no focused testing folks. We realized that we're not going to actually hire them, that we're going to actually push teams to increase their testing automation to a level where it's not even necessary, right? So we very quickly, in about year's time, like 2015, 2016, we got into a situation where there was no manual testing even for larger deployments. All the daily deployments, of course, were not manually tested. There was a strong enough automation suite to cover the functionality testing and integration testing. So, and very quickly, those service owners who had certain parts of the application, their success was measured by test coverage or code coverage, basically, on unit level, integration level, and UI test level as well. Yes?
Question regarding automated testing alone being well enough to ship big features to production. Imagine that your thank you. So imagine your end-to-end automation test suite passes, and everything that should work works, everything that should be visible is visible, but it's just plain ugly. How do you capture that?
Yeah, so this of course was done because when the product team works on their feature, they are doing daily releases into test environments, right? And then product owners and developers are looking at, and designers as well, looking at those. But what I'm talking about here is things that sort of are deploy ready and how to get them to production. So then there wasn't any more humans looking at it, basically. So because of the high coverage of integration and unit tests and the UI tests, we were pretty confident that actually we can continue along these lines. Later, like 2017, we realized that we actually teams need some kind of a quality person still who would do a little bit of planning, like what kind of tests to write, what the kind of flows to cover. So we introduced the function of quality analyst in the team, and they then worked with the teams to basically help developers to pinpoint the areas that need automation. Yeah, actually in Piedrive, the frequency of releases was quite astonishing. When I left 2018, we did 60 deployments per day, about 130 engineers back then. So it was, we actually had deployment queues. So if you needed to deploy something, you had to wait a couple of hours before other deployments were able to finish their testing cycles. So normal sort of so we had a couple of monoliths and a number of microservices, but when you deployed monolith, it was about 15 minutes that you had to wait for it to go to the CI and execute all the tests. But in Piedrive, we discovered one cool thing that almost by accident actually, which I can't really name too well, but I call it cross-layer automated regression suite. So we have in Piedrive we had a PHP backend, basically an API that the web app runs on top of it. So we had the UI tests testing web app, and we had integration tests testing API endpoints. And across various endpoints, the coverage varied basically. But then we figured out, hey, why not to run the API into sort of a debugging mode and execute UI tests and see how is the endpoint coverage from the UI tests perspective. So we realized that, all right, it's actually somewhere totally different in terms of endpoints what goes to the tests that have been created to test those endpoints. So then we realized we have actually pretty good coverage. So each time we deploy backend or web app, then we execute both tests suits, and we are good to go. So that was a wonderful discovery. There was, of course, some areas that were a little bit gray, but with that combination, we then optimized the test suite running speed, doing lots of parallel executors, basically, and it was done in about 8 minutes. So lots of test infrastructure, actually about, I think it was 15% at that one time, that was only doing testing. And then out of all infrastructure, 15% was allocated to testing. So that was a wonderful discovery and saved lots of gray hair for us and enabled to move fast. Well, in Veriff, today we have a highly virtualized set of microservices. And virtualization is important here because everything runs in Docker, is hosted in Kubernetes that lives in AWS. So we are able to deploy very freely because those microservices only do one thing. If it doesn't work, we can roll back. So we are doing lots of this sort of deployments. Maybe we are at like 10, 15 deployments per day rate today at Veriff. Since deployments are also automated, so the moment you think it's ready and you merge to master, boom, deployment goes to live, you immediately get feedback, and since it really takes only a couple of minutes and seconds to replace those containers or images, then you also get very fast feedback as well. And the cool thing that since we were so virtualized, we realized that we have an opportunity to create as many test environments as possible. So rather than testing things in your own computer, you already deploy your branch into recently created test environment that has controlled conditions where you can execute those tests in CI flow. And since it's everything is virtualized, test environment creation is basically like a matter of seconds, and all the services you can define what you need to run your tests in that specific environment. And yeah, rollbacks also due to highly virtualized nature of our infra stack, rollbacks are really easy. You just deploy the previous version, boom, from deploy manager, and you're done. So that's cool. So there is things to do still in Veriff, of course. So one of the things being the code coverage, where we would be also a little bit closer to Piedrive situation, where for smaller changes you would not have to do manual testing. Those flows, those points are covered with automation suite. So measuring unit integration and also test coverage from UI test perspective is important, and it has to grow. We also now deployed automation, machine learning, automation black box testing. This is basically to validate, again, under controlled conditions. If we do any changes in our automation stack, we have a predefined data set that is flowing through the tests and then basically showing us, did we improve anything? And since we control the input data, we are able to compare the output data effectiveness of automation stack as well. Yes, you have a question?
Yes, please. Thank you. So how do you stand on code coverage? How trustworthy do you find this metrics? And if you do find it pretty much trustworthy, so what are the bad or good numbers?
Yeah, it's a little bit loaded question. So what we have done is that we actually have given team the authority and autonomy to choose the tooling and set the levels that they feel comfortable with. It's very, actually specific to technology that you're using. It also depends on the maturity of the service. So if you need to deploy something quickly, probably not going to delay because of the test coverage is low. But the team knowing that if they need to do an update after a couple of months or even a half year later, they need to know that, okay, if I have those tests, I am feeling much drier to do that change and use the same test that I created in the beginning as well. So some teams are at 80% unit test coverage, some have 10%. So of course, all the legacy stuff, all stuff that we know, we just don't touch that much anymore. So it's context related very heavily. So I finished with black box, so that's to test our machine learning stack. Then the other thing that we are currently developing is sort of an end-to-end smoke test suite that would run always for each component deployment. This would run. So we basically have a couple of flows there that we cover. So if you think about Veriff as such, the flow is that end user generates a session. We capture the picture of media and face and video. Then it goes through the approval engine. We approve it either automatically or manually. And then we send the webhook back to the customer saying that this is the data that we extracted and this is the verdict that we gave to that session. So we want to automate that flow and execute that test suite all per each component deployment. And no matter does it have any relation to the functionality or not, we just execute it blindly and make sure that happy flow always works. Of course, since now we have built up quite a big of machine learning capability in Veriff, I'm also dreaming about sort of automated, or how we can create automated tests using human input, just that we would basically have anybody writing tests, and then boom, automation takes over after the human input has been given. So some kind of automatic generation of tests, and tooling is doing very big steps in that area. Yep. One of the things that we always struggle with is that we need data for testing. We need those sessions, but those sessions are very, let's say, they are very sensitive. So we can't have those personal information lying around in test infrastructure everywhere, you know. So we probably need to generate lots of test data in future for ourselves. Yes.
You use or will be using generative these adversarial networks for test data?
Yeah, it's a good question, good idea. We'll see. I can't answer that at the moment. This is just sort of one of the areas that we need to invest in terms of investigating how to do that. Because if we generate too simple data, then we render our sort of testing useless as well. So, I mean, users are very clever. So our test data generator needs to be as clever as they are. So these are the ideas for the future for Veriff. So thank you for listening, and I wasn't terribly over time, so maybe a couple of questions. Yes?
It's too early to clap. So, do you have a brother?
Brother?
Yes.
Two.
Okay, good. So you have a brother which really looks you alike. And for Piedrive and for Skype, it doesn't matter. Because for them it's user, if he stole your credentials, who cares, right? But for Veriff, that's quite a big thing, because it's KYC, and if someone, your brother, takes your ID card, looks like it's Tiit Paananen, I take a loan, lease, apartment, drugs, girls, and go somewhere else, you'll be in trouble, and Veriff will be in trouble. So, from a quality assurance perspective, can it be somehow testable, and what kind of approach you're taking?
Yeah. So, first of all, the automation stack works only if it's pretty much sure. I mean, I think that they are very close to 100% when they actually make decision automatically, whatever check they are doing. Now, if the machines are not sure enough, then it goes to manual review, where people only look at the things that machine was not really conclusive about, and then they make decision.
What about twins?
So twins is a big problem. Our approach to that is twofold. First, twins is always problem anywhere you go. Yes, but there is other things as well, you know. There is a possibility to query lots of databases about people, and this is developing scene. We can query those and cross-reference the data as well. But if we have identical twin posing as his brother or sister, and we probably will not catch it. I mean, let's be clear. But none of the people in the bank will do that as well. So it's a problem that yet to be solved. There are solutions what goes to machine learning. Actually, there is a difference in twins what goes to emotional state transfer. That becomes already pretty complicated. But even twins change emotions differently. So the algorithms can detect that whether the person last time is now a little bit different. So there is hope, but this is a little bit on the lab side still.
So basically, you put them in front of a bot, and then put them on an emotional swing. So you piss them off, slick throw them, and see how they react, right?
Yeah. So by emotional state, I didn't mean those emotions that you have. It's not so blunt. It's very sort of microscopic changes. And I know Tartu people have been researching that a lot, actually. So, with the verification, it's important to realize that we are here to protect the customer from the sort of fraudulent behavior. We actually, I don't know whether you noticed, but last year we purchased a company called Browser ID. And they do lots of device and network fingerprinting. So there are a lot more fraudulent markers before we come to the face, let's say so, that we can detect. But I wouldn't encourage twins to do that, because by they're doing illegal act and they probably get in trouble at some point of time. So I don't know, any of you are twins? No? Do you have twin? Anybody? You have a twin?
Yeah.
Are you using this opportunity often?
I can tell. I cannot tell.
Ah, you cannot tell. Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
You don't respond for another person.
Yeah. So basically, my hunch is that twins sort of know what is okay and what is not, and yeah.
And it's also probably pretty easy to prove that you have a twin.
Yes. But I mean, if there would be a government registry that we could query that whether this person has a twin, boom, problem solved. But we don't have those. Yes.
I'm presuming that what you're doing at Veriff is the future of testing. But just to be precise or shed some light, what was Piedrive lacking then? What were they lacking that doesn't fall under the future of testing?
I think not much actually. Piedrive.
Because I'm thinking of the graph you showed with Skype way out there in the ethos. And,
Actually, it's not so. Skype didn't really, I mean, the productivity in terms of testing, like how quickly we could push things live, Piedrive was much better at it when Skype was. In terms of testing depth, yes, it was higher there because, I mean, we had the automation testing stack running, we had 2 companies testing the same release candidate,
also
and,
Piedrive.
no, in Skype, etc. So Skype was significantly higher because lots of more manual testing was involved. Those 2 companies, by the way, found different bugs, which was also interesting. So testing was a much thorough effort there. Also, you have to realize that Skype is downloadable application, so you can't really call it back. But in Piedrive, it's SaaS service. You can change the image right away, and boom, it works again. So from that perspective, that depthness, that thoroughness is not even necessary. Otherwise, it becomes too expensive to run. Yes?
Well, I understand that when a person wants to use Veriff, then he or she has to make an image of this ID from both sides and
Yes.
then make a selfie. But how can you be sure that these pictures have been taken at this same day? For example, maybe I do have a selfie of, I don't know, my sister, and then I can make a picture of her ID and use that.
Yes, so it's actually pretty simple because the flow is live. The flow starts on the, let's say it starts, you'll read through, on the 3rd second you do a selfie. On the, 10th second you show your document front. On the 20th second you show your document back and click, make pictures. the whole thing is videotaped.
Okay, it's videotape.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yes.
So
So
it's not possible to like
no,
like
no. People
intervene this kind of
people,
like requests and
yes.
this kind of
people actually don't read the fine print, and they are doing lots of nice exercises in front of the camera, okay, and they're like moving the camera. It's, people are very creative, so yeah. But the fact that the whole session is videotaped, that removes the possibility of fraudulent activities that are stupid ones. There are more sort of more intelligent approaches as well, but even that, we can detect slideshows like computer screens, etc. That's relatively easy to get from the computer vision analysis.
What else do your application do that user doesn't know about?
Actually, user knows everything about it, so they just have to take the time to read through the service agreement or terms and conditions. Yes.
like 1,000 pages.
And actually, I think we even say on the UI that you are videoed. Yes.
Alrighty, I think